Episode 10. We have finally come to the best continent, the best country. We're going to North America. And not only that, we're going to the United States. And we're talking about the American alligator. Now, I do say that it's United States. There are some in Mexico as well, and we'll get into that. But as for now, let's discuss our exhibit. Today, we are actually going to be focusing a lot on the aesthetic of the exhibit itself. With some of the other animals, like the addax, and to an extent, some of the others, we've focused a bit on aesthetics. However, this is going to be the main goal, is to make this exhibit a scene, and something memorable if you were to see it in person. Now, we're going to cut this area in half, relatively. Half is going to be in water, half is going to be on land. However, you do want more water than land, because alligators and all forms of crocodilians absolutely love water. That's a basic fact that pretty much everyone's aware of. So, I've made a slope, and I'm going to make little islands just close to the shore, sort of giving it that look of the Everglades. Now, interestingly, this is one of the only animals I have first-hand experience with in this game. And by that, I mean I lived in Florida for a hot minute, so I know where they lived. I didn't live there long. I'm not from there. However, discussing the animal itself, the swampy terrain that they live in really is a unique and strangely both gross and beautiful location. It's very hard to explain to someone who hasn't seen it. So, we're going to be having a lot of work done with the actual terrain to make it look both that rough and strange, yet still smooth and clean look. Now, as I add the mud and grass and terrain, let me discuss the animal in question. The American alligator, being one of only two alligator species, the other one being the Chinese alligator, is one of the largest alligators in this side of the planet, the only contender being the black caiman. The tree of crocodilians is a little confusing because there are alligators, and then alligadians also include alligators and caimans. We'll discuss this later, maybe. We have two different species of caiman in the game, so maybe we will get into it. But currently, the American alligator is the largest reptile in the continental US. Now, talking about the actual size of the American alligator, males are relatively, or usually larger than females, going anywhere from 11.2 to 15.1 feet long, and females roughly being 8.5 to 9.8 feet long. Now, the largest American alligator ever found was actually 19 feet and 2 inches and weighed 2.2 thousand pounds, so over a ton. And that is because, as with most crocodilians, they don't stop growing. They continue to grow until the day they die. So it was very likely that it was not only a well-fed alligator, but an old alligator. If you take a look at what I'm adding right now, they're known as knees, and they, at least in this game, are specifically of the bald cypress tree. However, they are known to form on other swamp-dwelling plants, and no one really knows why they exist. They do grow from the roots of swamp-dwelling trees, and it is an absolute icon of the mangroves and Everglades. So, if you are adding the American alligator, I would absolutely recommend adding them to your exhibit. And of course, I am adding other mangroves, willow trees, cypress. You know, those are the staples here. So, while you're adding them, keep in mind that you are definitely going to want to have a thick foliage cover look. Now, the issue is the alligator only enjoys about a 50% foliage cover. So we're going to do our nice little trick of putting trees in the ground, make it look a bit thicker, having them on the outside of the exhibit to give it that more dense jungle slash swamp look. And I think it's really going to make it look more appealing. Now, if we go back to our animal as we work on the exhibit's walls, the alligator is actually native to a much larger range than most people think. So, when you think American alligator, you almost always think of the Everglades, Florida specifically. However, they are actually native, their native range is all the way from southern Virginia all the way down to the northernmost parts of Mexico and as far inland as parts of Oklahoma. They pretty much are all over the northern half of the Gulf of Mexico and then push halfway up the eastern seaboard of the United States. So they have a much larger range than a lot of people think. And that's because, being a reptile, most people don't think they can live in such cold environments. And usually, that would be correct. The American alligator, however, actually has the coldest demographic of any alligator or crocodile known to man. Now, one of their tricks is that they can live in frozen lakes by keeping their nose just above the water and slowing their heartbeat down, going into a hibernation. They can't do it for a great time, but they can do it long enough to pretty much survive freezing over and making it through the shorter winters the South usually has, which I didn't know till I did research, and I find absolutely fascinating. Now, there's a few other little facts about the, I don't want to say the range, but the actual name of the alligator is Alligator mississippiensis, which means, Florida, you need to lose your crown, because apparently this bad boy's from Mississippi. Now, granted, it probably just has the name because when they found the Mississippi River, they found alligators in it. So that's probably where it comes from. However, I find it hilarious that its scientific name is another state, and it's not the one it's famous for. So, one of the things I'm very glad that this is a longer video is I have a lot to talk about. And one of the things that I really wanted to bring up is the ancient nature of the alligator. Now, everyone knows crocodilians had existed on Earth long before the dinosaurs. However, the American alligator is relatively recent. However, it is still extremely old. The oldest skull that we were able to find was from 2.5 million years ago, and it looks exactly the same as a modern alligator. And since we're on the shape of the skull, let's discuss how we can tell the difference between a crocodile and an alligator. So, an alligator is going to have a wider, more rounded snout. That's the big way you can tell. Crocodiles have a more pointed snout, and alligators have a more rounded snout. If you still can't tell from there, if you see an alligator with a closed mouth, and you can tell it has a wider mouth, because only the top teeth will stick out of its mouth. Whereas crocodiles, because they come to a more narrow point, they will have interchanging teeth. So a bottom tooth might stick out, a top tooth might stick out after that, and that's one way you can tell. Now, let's go back to the exhibit. If you notice, I am currently adding mist, or steam, or fog. It could really be any of that, depending on what you're using it for. And that is one of the big aesthetic things you could do. The Everglades are humid. Like I said, I lived in Florida. I lived there for about a year. Every morning it is wet and foggy and kind of gross, I'll be honest. It's not fun. but this will give it that misty, foggy, mysterious look. And I did take some pictures of this exhibit during sunset, and it looks so aesthetically pleasing. I might add some here. If it's one of those little things you can add, and there's a few different scene options that you can find in the constructions tab. It took me a long time to find them, but there's steam, dust, falling leaves, cherry blossoms. It's very, very useful in making a beautiful exhibit. And right now we're going to add one other thing to make it more aesthetically pleasing, but also giving it some character, and we are going to use the jutty beds to make an old, dilapidated dock, which would be very common. They would have docks all throughout the Everglades, wherever someone might have a cabin or a little shelter, because the only way you can traverse that place is through riverboats. Now, let's get back to the animal, because like I said, I have a lot to talk about, and I realize I'm about halfway through this video. So, some of the other information has to do with their breeding patterns, and their young. So, as a matter of fact, a lot of people don't realize this, but the alligator is a phenomenal mother. Alligators aren't actually that deadly. As a matter of fact, you're more likely to be eaten by a man than an alligator in the Sunshine State. And they will build a nest out of rotting vegetation so that they can keep their eggs at a nice warm temperature. It'll insulate the heat more than just digging a pit in soil. And they will guard that nest with their lives, and they will kill anything that gets too close. And even though a lot of people don't realize this, on land, alligators are still very fast. They can run roughly 22 miles an hour. A little smart information: if you need to get away from a running alligator, they can't run for a long period of time, and of course they struggle with steep inclines, and of course if you can climb. It's a great way to go. So, the interesting fact of these nests is that because they are able to control the temperature of the eggs themselves, there's actually a scientific way to tell if you're going to have male or females come from the nest. And that is all based on temperature. Now, it's not a 100% guarantee, but it is much more likely if temperatures are a certain point. For example, if you have the eggs in some form of nest or in captivity, if you keep it roughly around 86 degrees Fahrenheit, you will get mostly females. If it's over 93, you'll get males, and in between there, you'll have a roughly 50-50 split. Now, before we get into this, I want to talk about the pathway I'm making, and I have decided that I wanted to remove the railing, and that is so we can add our own little type of railing. And instead of a railing, I've decided we are going to use plexiglass. There were a few different ways that I thought of doing this, whether it be making some kind of almost like a causeway, but at the end of the day, I wanted the glass just so that you get the best view. And even though you don't have to worry about this in-game, I didn't want the idea of being able to reach over and get your hand bitten off, because alligators can jump out of the water. They don't do it often, but they will to catch different animals that might fly a little too close to the water. So, for a more realistic approach, I just wanted a flat area that you couldn't accidentally get hurt with. Now, going back to the breeding patterns, or the nature of their breeding, the males do something very interesting during the mating season. And they will show off and try to impress females through bellowing, smacking the water with their jaws. And if you've ever heard a gator bellow, it's very... it shakes your chest because it is such a low frequency that even in the water, you feel it more than you hear it. And it will rumble the water, it'll make the water jump out from wherever they are, and that is sort of their mating call. Now, we are nearing the end of the construction phase, so let's talk about a little bit more information that I have. And this will mostly just be their biology, right? So what we have is, first and foremost, their bite force. The American alligator has a 13,172 Newton bite force. Now, I know most of you don't even know what a Newton is, and I don't blame you. Don't worry, I've got something for you. It's pretty much 2,961 pound per foot. This is an extremely powerful bite, and it really helps because alligators, as with pretty much all reptiles, cannot chew. They have to eat whole bites and just swallow it whole. And one of the ways they do that when catching something, like in this case it would be a deer or one of those feral boar that just need to be eliminated from North America, is they will drag it under the water from the water's edge, drown it, take a nice strong bite, and then do what is known as the death roll, very famous move that they do, where they will spin, twisting mouthfuls of meat off, and then swallowing that whole. A little more information is that they have sensors on their head to read pressure changes, whether it be in the atmosphere or in the water, to help find food. And they actually have it more concentrated than some other crocodilians, and this actually makes them more sensitive. Now, let's take a look here. If you notice, I actually had to remove a little bit of foliage from the exhibit, but for the most part, this does fit and work with our alligator. And I'm gonna just give a little bit of more information. I'm just about done. I love having more information than I have time for, rather than vice versa. It's so easy. So, one of the last forms of information I have, it kind of has to do with these smaller pockets that I've decided to add of water, and that is to represent something known as a gator hole. Now, some people think that gator holes are something that is already existing, and that's just where they like to hang out, but gator holes can actually be made by alligators themselves by moving mud or digging around to sort of make a nice little pit that they can exist and enjoy their time in. And of course, finally, we're going to talk about the cultural influence of the alligator. And there's not too much to say. You know, obviously, the state reptile of Florida, Louisiana, and Mississippi. That's to be expected. And there is a rumor, a bit of lore in the United States, that during the War of 1812, when Andrew Jackson had fought off the British right down in Louisiana, the ships that he destroyed and the men that fell overboard were victim to American alligators. But that just goes to show, even the nature of America was in favor of the Monroe Doctrine. And I think that is a great way to end off this video. If you enjoyed it, please leave a like and comment. If there's anything you would like to add, absolutely comment down below, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye-bye.